Welcome back, sports fans, to one of my favorite times of the year. It's 24/7 college basketball. Yeah, sure, we're watching games like Rider versus Stony Brook or Valpo versus Northern Illinois before we get to the big games in the afternoon. But it doesn't matter. It's a good opportunity to see some of these mid-major teams and see what we're going to get an idea of what we can see from them headed down tournament time in March. Best time of the year, college basketball is back. But today, even more importantly, we're going to open up the mailbag because we got a lot to talk about, a lot of questions, and a lot of things I've been seeing, especially the Los Angeles Lakers making a move and getting rid of Mike Brown and bringing in Mike D'Antoni. We're going to answer one of those questions in a little bit. So let's do this. Sure, LA should have fired Mike Brown. They shouldn't have hired him to begin with. I thought it was a terrible hire to be, from jump. I personally would have hired Brian Shaw, which is something we'll address later on. But when LA brought in Mike Brown, I had a lot of questions. This was a guy in Cleveland who, yes, he won a lot of won a lot of games and got deep into the playoffs. But his real offensive set was, let's let LeBron go 1-on-5. There wasn't a very good team that he had. There weren't a whole lot of pieces, but he didn't really draw up a whole lot of sets. Their team was stagnant, and we saw that with LA last year when they were in the playoffs. They were dysfunctional on the offensive end. Kobe ended up taking a lot of shots. Mike Brown was known for his defense, and he's a defensive-minded guy, and he did a good job with defense last year. This year they struggled a little bit on the defensive end, and it had something to do with Steve Nash not being a great on-ball defender, which he's never been throughout his career, but he's also hurt. Pau Gasol, not very good. He wasn't very physical to start the season, played a little bit soft. Dwight Howard's still recovering from injury, and his presence wasn't really known on the back end yet. So their defense struggled, but offensively, the Los Angeles Lakers looked dysfunctional again, like last year towards the end of the season. I know Mike Brown wanted to implement the Princeton offense. I hated that idea to begin with. That's not a real system to fit the team. So the Lakers, they cut ties early with Mike Brown. I agreed with getting rid of him. I know 5 games is a quick time to get rid of somebody. They should have gotten rid of him before the season even started, in my opinion. But by making the hire last year, they decided they were to go into the season, and things just did not start off well. I mean, if you look, in the preseason, they didn't win a single game, and in the regular season, they struggled through their first 5 games. So it wasn't just 5 games he was being evaluated on. It was his entire body of work, including last year and in the playoffs. In the preseason. Last year in the playoffs, or during the season, the Lakers did not achieve their overall goal. This year, this is a playoff team. This is a team that's expected to contend for an NBA title, and they struggled all preseason trying to understand this Princeton offense that Mike Brown and Eddie Jordan were trying to implement, and it carried over in the regular season. So Dr. Buss decided to make a move. I'm okay with it. I would have never made the hire to begin with. I'm not sure I agree with the hiring of Mike D'Antoni. I think he's a good coach. I really do. I think people need to take a step back and push aside those 4 years that he had in New York and really look at him and evaluate him on his Olympic experience with Coach K, Mike Krzyzewski, and Nick McMillan, and Jim Boeheim. I think he was an excellent addition to that Olympic squad. He really helped out their offense, got the Olympic team to play up-tempo, and have good offensive sets. And also evaluate him on his experience, what he did with Phoenix. In Phoenix, he was a very good basketball coach. He got very deep in the playoffs. He had opportunities to get the NBA Finals, but they were beaten by the Mavs, a couple times. But he's an offensive-minded guy, so that's going to improve the Lakers' offensive sets. Defensively, Mike D'Antoni doesn't preach it. He doesn't teach it at all. And it's going to be very important for him to bring in a defensive-minded guy. I've said from the beginning after this hire that they need to go out and get a guy like Nate McMillan, who also has coached with him during the Olympics. Nate McMillan's a fantastic basketball coach whose teams are known for playing solid defense, who is actually in the running for the head coaching job with the Lakers, which is something we'll get into, again, in a later question that's coming up, who I thought should have been hired. When you have an opportunity to bring in a guy like D'Antoni, a guy who's going to fix the offense, who's really going to fit Steve Nash's his mold, I like that. But The only question I have here is the Lakers are an older basketball team. Kobe's 35. Pau is not young. Steve Nash is up there in age as well. So you're bringing in these older, you have these older guys, and you're bringing in a guy who wants to play up-tempo and run. The only guy who really can run the floor consistently, and what that means he's got to be healthy, is Dwight Howard, because he's a younger guy and he can fit that role. So it'll be an interesting, to see how the Lakers develop coming down the season. They're going to score a lot of points. You have some defensive pieces in place already. Kobe being a first-team All-Defender, I should say. Dwight Howard is a first-team All-Defensive player. They've got Metal World Peace to play defense as well. So there are defensive pieces that that D'Antoni has here that he didn't have in New York, that he did not necessarily have in Phoenix. But it's going to be interesting to see how this Lakers team, A, can run throughout a full season, and B, how will they play defense under D'Antoni, who's known not to preach defense. And I was making the hiring for the Lakers. It was Phil Jackson's job to lose, in my opinion. But I can also understand wanting to move away from that era. Phil had a lot of demands. This was a guy who wanted some ownership stake. His health has always been a concern. He's getting up there in age. And you know what? You're really trying to move on or transition into the future. Maybe Dr. Buss wanted to get away from the triangle offense and get back to something that worked for him in the past, and something more up tempo. So I can understand moving away or not giving the job to Phil Jackson. I mean, the 11 rings, his connection with the city of LA, and his connection with this basketball team, especially Kobe Bryant, is unparalleled. But I can understand making a move and going a different direction. As I stated before, when the job came up, when Phil retired 2 years ago, I would have given it to Brian Shaw. I thought Shaw was the right fit. This was a guy who had a connection with Kobe Bryant. He had a connection to the Lakers organization. He was a Phil Jackson disciple. It was going to be a smooth transition. They were going to run the triangle offense. Shaw would probably have implement some ideas and beliefs of his own. But this was he's a young, bright basketball coach. He was a very bright player when he was with the Lakers. He was a coach on the floor. He knows the game. It has been interesting that he hasn't gotten a job since. I think he really wanted this Laker job, and I think a lot of teams passed over on him because they believed that he was going to be the Laker coach of the future, and I think he understood that too, or thought that. So it's been interesting to see that Shaw has not gotten a job since, and I think this year, when some jobs come open, we'll see Shaw's name thrown out again, and he'll come in. He might have an opportunity there with another organization. Looking at some of the other coaches that are available, and I understand that the Lakers, wanted a proven coach. You had Nate McMillan out there, who I mentioned before, who has connections to Kobe and Dwight from coaching the Olympics. He's also coached against them when he was with Portland and Seattle. Here's a guy I really like, Nate McMillan. He's a defensive guy. He runs some really nice offense. The issues with his teams have been at times they go through shooting droughts, but that's because they become jump shooting teams. But I think he's a bright, solid basketball coach. But that was not the choice for the Lakers. They did bring in Mike D'Antoni. We've talked about that hire already. A name that I really like and I personally thought should have been thrown around for this position, who I thought would have been an excellent fit and would have been my choice, is Jeff Van Gundy. I know he's a television analyst at this point. He's been out of the game for a couple of years. And, one of my buddies and we've actually sat around and we talked about this. He thinks Van Gundy might have crossed over into that analyst role where you can't even bring him back. And the game might have passed him by. I don't believe that at all. This was a guy who learned under Pat Riley. He's got a great offensive mind. He's also a very good defensive mind. He's had some great assistants come through who's coached for him. Tom Thibodeau being one who's coaching in Chicago right now. And you can see the defensive imprint Tom Thibodeau has had, the stuff that he learned under Van Gundy and Doc Rivers. But Van Gundy was a guy who had a lot of success with big men, including Patrick Ewing, which would be great for a guy like Dwight Howard. Van Gundy has also had success with a guy like Yao Ming. Again, something that helped Dwight on the offensive end. This guy would have been fit in really nice with Kobe. His Knicks teams played up tempo at times, but they also were very good in executing in a half-court set. That's what made those New York Knicks teams so very good. Teams that really should have, in a different era, would have won an NBA title. They just, ended up playing against those Chicago Bulls. So Van Gundy's a name that I really would have taken a look at. I thought it would have been an excellent hire, an excellent choice, but His name never really was brought up, and I find that to be a little interesting, especially considering they hired Mike DAntoni. The first football question, and of course we're going back to the coach's hire. I'm not sure who's. I want to say it's a push between Norv Turner and Andy Reid. And you know what? I want to cut more leeway here to Andy Reid. One, for his longevity of success. I understand these Philadelphia Eagles have not lived up to the potential that's been put out in front of them, or that's been expected. But this guy he knew when to get rid of Donovan McNabb. Okay? He also traded away Kevin Kolb for good draft picks because he knew that Kolb wasn't the answer. Brought in Mike Vick. They had a little bit of success together, but it hasn't been really, what they wanted or what Eagle fans expected. But that's not really Andy Reid's fault. Sure, the play calling, they need to run the ball a lot more with LaShawn McCoy. When you have a running back that's that dynamic as he is, he needs to get 25 to 30 touches a game. And I know that seems like a lot, especially for a guy like him, but he's probably your best offensive player, and he needs to get the ball more. But it's not Andy Reid's fault that Michael Vick keeps throwing the ball to the other team. It's not Andy Reid's fault that Michael Vick is fumbling the football. Turnovers are part of the game, but as a player, you've got to do a better job of protecting the football. And Mike Vick has not done that. And Andy Reid doesn't have very many options, behind him. He's got a rookie in Nick Foles, so I really like his future, and I think Andy Reid does too. It was a really good draft of his. The kid out of Arizona, he's got a big-time arm. He's mobile in the pocket. But he's young, he's raw, and he needs to be given an opportunity to grow into the quarterback position. He's not really ready to step right in. But that's not, like I said, it's not Andy Reid's fault that the Philadelphia Eagles are turning the football over. It's not his fault that defensively these players that have been brought in have not lived up to their potential. I mean, they brought in all these defensive guys. D'Amico Ryans was brought in. They brought in some corners. They brought in Cullen Jenkins. They brought in all these players, and they have not lived up to their potential on the defensive end. And it cost a couple defensive coordinator the job. So again, Andy Reid is on the hot seat. I want to cut him more slack than I will Norv Turner. Norv, I cannot back any longer. I think his teams have underachieved for far too long. He's a great offensive coordinator, but that's about it. Yes, you can say the same thing with, his team was turning the ball over. Phillip Rivers has not played well. I understand that, but his teams come up a little bit soft. They don't execute. His time and game clock management have always been under question. I just think Norv has run his course, has run his welcome there, and it's time to move on for San Diego. Andy Reid, I would say, deserves one more year. And I know Loria has come out and said, that this team doesn't make the playoffs or make a big push, he's going to be gone. But, I'd have to give my big man Andy Reid another year. I really think he's one of the best football coaches in the NFL, and I think it'd be an extremely wrong decision for the Philadelphia Eagles to get rid of him. If you look at the options out there with this football team, what's a better option? You want to say bringing John Gruden out of the booth? Yeah, but who's your quarterback? Gruden's always like veteran quarterbacks that protect the football. That's not Mike Vick, and that's not Nick Foles. And that's not Andy. I mean, Andy Reid did the best he could with what he has. I didn't see a lot of people complaining about Michael Vick the past 2 seasons in Philadelphia. He was turning the ball over, but Philadelphia was winning, and there was other pieces that were causing a lot of problems. Now it's this year, it's Andy Reid's. Philadelphia is a knee-jerk reaction town. I love the city of Philadelphia. I love their sports fans. But it's times like this where they need to settle down just a little bit and think about the big picture. Think about what if Andy is given or another quarterback next season? What if the defense finally plays on the level that they're supposed to play at? What if they get in a defensive coordinator who's got a mindset of who's going to fix the pieces that are there? Those are the questions that need to be asked. It's not the head coach at this point. Okay, it's really about the guys on the defensive side of the ball stepping up, doing their job, and playing better. And it's guys like Michael Vick protecting the football. Marty Mornhinweg and Andy Reid need to do a better job of calling plays. I agree with that. They need to get the ball into McCoy's hands more often. But Michael Vick needs to control the football and protect the football better. And that's not an Andy Reid fault. That's a Michael Vick issue. So before fans really want to get rid of the head coach, they really need to take a look at their quarterback play and say, well, what do our quarterbacks need to do better, and what does the defense need to do better before we make a move at the head coaching position? It's a little early in the season to do this, but I'd have to say my favorite team to win this, it's between Kentucky and Kansas. I think Kentucky, it's interesting to look at them this year. It's like this with every year. It's so much turnover. They're such a young team. They struggled against Maryland, who I will say, I believe the Maryland Terrapins are probably the most underrated basketball team in college basketball this year. I think they're going to be really good coming around tournament time. They will be in the NCAA tournament, and they will make some noise. Now, I'm not saying they're going to win the title. I'm not going to go that far. But I believe the Maryland Terrapins, one of the most underrated basketball teams coming into the season. They will be heard from this year. But back to Kentucky and Kansas, it's between those two teams, I really think. I think Kansas and Bill Self, he's got a really good basketball team. They got some veteran leadership, guys who have been around the block before. And unlike them, Kentucky is very young. You're starting 4 freshmen again. They lack some general leadership, what we saw in Game 1, but this is a team that's going to improve significantly over the course of the entire season. John Calipari always has a good basketball team. He always does a good job of gelling and meshing his team together and developing them come tournament time. So given time, Kentucky will be there. They're going to struggle early on just because these are, let's call them what they are. They're still high schoolers at this point. They're going to experience things they've never experienced before. But come, March, this is going to be a dangerous basketball team. They're talented. They've got good wing play. They've got some depth on the bench that showcased itself, nicely in the Maryland game. They've got some size. If I had to make a selection, I'd probably say Kentucky. I think Kentucky will be there cutting down the nets in March. Also, I want to give a quick shout-out to Kevin Ollie. I thought beating Michigan State in his first game was fantastic. It also proves that Kevin Ollie was the right choice, and UConn needs to pay this man. Get rid of that one-year contract. That was stupid to begin with, and that's embarrassing that the university did that to this man. There's a guy who paid his dues, who learned under Calhoun, was the right guy. Virtually made him a lame duck coach. Made recruiting virtually impossible for this man, and he still goes out and beats Michigan State. So props to Kevin Ollie for doing his job. Props for Kevin Ollie for getting his team ready. And props to the UConn basketball players for sticking with this man, not transferring after Calhoun left, and believing in that this guy was the right fit for their team. So shout out to Kevin Ollie for doing his job, and the UConn men's basketball team. Very proud to see that. Nobody was happier that he got the job than me. I thought Kevin Ollie is a great basketball mind, and he will be the head coach for UConn basketball for an extended period of time, and a long, long time. This university needs to give this man the money, the job, and the contract length that he deserves. So that's it. We're going to close up the mailbag. We'll tune in next week. I'm sure we're going to have a lot more to talk about as we head down into the nitty-gritty of the sports season. See you guys later.